Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Be Sustainable from UCEM. I'm joined today by Jason Ratcliffe. An alumnus of UCEM, Jason completed a master's with us in real estate in 2020 and has since been active as a member of both the Student and the Alumni Sustainability Committee and UCEM's Responsible Futures Working Group. Jason has emerged as a prominent thought leader in both sustainability and wellbeing. He hosts his own podcast, Heal Your Home, and is launching the Wellbeing Surveyor, an educational platform and consultancy. He has patented his own portable climate chamber, the Elemental Cube, of which more later, which led him to making an appearance at a Grand Designs Live event and winning Kevin MacLeod's Green Hero Award earlier on this year. So this is the first of a three-part series where we're talking with Jason about various aspects of well-being within construction, the built environment. First up, we're going to talk about whether or not we underestimate our impact on well-being. So, Jason, the topic for today, do we underestimate our impact on well-being? How is the built environment impacting our health and well-being?
Not in the best light, to be honest with you. I think we are so focused on the safety of buildings, which quite rightly should be up there as a main priority. But I think we've never really connected the dots as to how our buildings actually directly impact both positive and negatively on our health and our family's health. So I think that it is a massive issue, and there is research slowly coming out of the woodwork, but again, it needs to be connecting the dots between kind of the medical professionals, researchers out there, and the built environment, sort of building regulations, statutory regulations, all of that sort of stuff. So it's very disconnected and fragmented, in my opinion.
Okay. So it's all part of the holistic view rather than the current mode of designing and building.
Absolutely, yeah. Because you've got a lot of, for example, building regulations under U value, for example, walls have to hit a certain criteria for U value, so the roofs, etc. That's it really, under thermal efficiency, not anything else. You've got minimal things around ventilation to do with, yes, they do dabble onto well-being, but they touch on it. They don't actually kind of delve into it.
So in your view then, Jason, we as a sector, we underestimate the impact that we have on the occupants of buildings?
Yes, I think we've pretty much nailed the health and safety and obviously the quality of buildings on paper. But I think that there's not enough quantifiable data out there to actually measure the severity of the products we put in, the techniques of construction, but also maintaining those buildings. And it's not just the obvious, they look a bit run down or anything like that. It's the effects and the implications it has on occupants. And I think that's massively under-researched at the minute.
Okay. So given a lack of research and available data, how realistically can we accommodate thoughts about well-being within the life cycle of design and construction?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think, to be honest with you, it's from start to finish, in my opinion. I think from the get-go of when a client or when planning permission's put in, I think at that point we need to start to think about how it's implemented all the way through to completion, obviously snagging this and signing off. So I think it's almost that golden string through all of the phases of construction and how well-being is thought through. I don't think it's thought about. Obviously, there's a lot to deal with. There's a lot to think about anyway. It's very complex, obviously, developing something, especially with a time frame and a budget. So then kind of saying, well, why should we be adding something else into that to make it even harder? I think if there was enough structure and support there for that, and also a regulatory perspective, I think if it was something that was brought in as, look, it may not have to be as extreme as, we're obviously kind of wanting it to be, just in line with building regulations as they are, and just say it needs more thought, and that's it. And it needs to then be integrated into every stage of that construction.
Okay. But what we're looking at here is taking the Building Safety Act and building control as the minimum.
Yes.
The bare minimum that we should be doing to keep people safe. Moving beyond that, is part of the problem that clients and end users don't know what they should reasonably expect or what their buildings could do for them?
Yeah, absolutely. It's that not knowing. It's that we don't explore it is as a nation anywhere near enough. I think, for example, a lot of clients, they'll look at black spot mold and they'll think of it as an aesthetically displeasing thing in their house, and they'll go, I want to clean that because it looks unclean. But for example, what's really behind the scenes is much more impactful on health, and it goes way beyond aesthetics. So that, for an example, is really important to then kind of say to people, look, these are the signs, but this is what we need to do about it. But then, like you were saying about the minimums, I think the minimums don't do enough. I think the minimums do enough for physical safety and quality of a building, but it never really goes into any detail about, well-being, for example, in a home. And that's where the problem is.
Okay. Then let's try and unpack some of your work and some of what the Elemental Cube does. Opportunity for you to talk about yourself for a moment there.
Brilliant.
But what are the different factors that you're looking at within a building that support well-being?
Yeah, so to be honest, from an Elemental Cube perspective and my PhD research, I'm very much looking at how a building behaves, not from just the obvious, but from how it then can create additional lighting issues, or how can it be enhancing noise pollution barriers? How can airflow be optimized? How can the thermal efficiency of a building be optimized? Not just for money saving, but obviously you're then looking at the 4 pillars of you're looking at 4 pillars of sustainability, and wellness. So you're looking at physical wellness, mental wellness, financial, and sustainability. So although sustainability fits in that very nicely, and it is still very important, it's not the be all and end all. Everything else has to come into it as well, equally as importantly. So so basically I fell into developing the Elemental Cube because part of my PhD is looking at U-value calculations, real life ones on buildings, and I needed to do that all year round. And the issue with that is you have to have set parameters and controls in place for those buildings for the U values to count and to be ISO approved. And obviously, if you've got sun beating down on a thermal couple, so that the sensor externally, things like that, or internally, variations change through drafts and all sorts of things, it can become really problematic. And especially in a building that has no heating. So essentially, it's an empty shell that's been derelict for over 25 years. It becomes almost impossible. And so I created it for that very reason, because then I was creating something that effectively can very accurately control the climate within a cubic meter, which then can be transferred, transported. It can be kind of taken in a vehicle by one person. These are all things I just needed it to do, not because I thought, great, it's gonna be needed elsewhere. And then kind of shortly after that, the more I talk to people and the more I'm kind of helping with sort of local councils and developments, the more people are gripping onto it and saying, wow, this is great, because we can get a lot more data and we can get a lot more seasonal data as well, whereas kind of there's a lot of restrictions around when you can do U-value data collection, stuff like that, whereas this basically means you can go anywhere in the world, anytime, any season, and get ISO approved data immediately, which is going to be quite exciting.
Very much so. And presumably this is the research and the solutions that you're developing. They can be varied according to the context of the building, whether it's a brand new building built to modern standards or an 18th century building or a listed building, and presumably works equally residential and commercial.
Yeah, absolutely. So for kind of older buildings, it allows architects and designers, or if you're a self-builder, to have real life data. And that is something that is so important, because then you're not going on hypothetical or simulation data to do what you think is best. You can then obviously go, right, before any of the planning or anything's designed, we know exactly what we're dealing with, and we can optimize in areas we need to optimize and cut down in areas that we don't necessarily need to put the money and the effort into. So that's really important. And accountability as well. So once the works have been done, how do you know that they've been done correctly? How do you know they hit the criteria of not just building regulations, but above and beyond? How do you know if they hit the clients or architects' specifications? Well, you can't really. You can hypothetically say, yes, these materials have been applied and get the sign off. But until, I suppose, 6, 12, 24 months later, when the cracks start to show, you don't know. So again, going back, we can test that and actually say, yes, this has been, or no, it hasn't been, this needs to be altered. So I think that in itself is creating accurate accountability for the construction industry and built environment.
So we talked about quantifying the problems, identifying the challenges there. Is that just about helping to prioritise what can be done to greatest benefit for the inhabitant?
Not necessarily. I mean, yes, that is part of it, and that's really helpful because not everyone has a budget to go, we're going to have maximum wellbeing enhancement on this building. But that's a big point, because you can then say, I have, I don't know, £100,000 to redevelop this property. Where is that best placed? And at the moment, if you get a contractor in, most of the time they would say, well, I know how to meet building regulation standards. I'm going to put in X amount of insulation, X amount of materials, and do it this way. I've done it that way all my life. The people that train me have done it all their life, and we know it works and gets signed off by building regs. That typically is what happens. But then, not just because of not knowing or not having the understanding, but it's also not having that quantifiable data. It's, how do you know, even if you know it's important? So even if I went into a building without quantifiable data, yes, you know the importance of it, but where do you start? Because it's still hypothetical. So going in and then actually getting that data accurately and, from a detailed level, not just taking one reading and going, oh, that's a representation of the whole building, actually mapping the building and looking at its orientation, its various construction types, its issues, if there's specific damp in locations, all these sorts of factors. You can then build a much bigger story and end up having what you'd class as a well-being optimization strategy for the building itself. So then you can say, right, okay, not just we've done that, we can meet building regs by doing X, Y, and Z, but we can also meet building regs by doing it this way, which is going to be much more tailored and beneficial to your building and your budget.
It's interesting you talk in that answer a couple of times about the building, but presumably whilst you can measure the way a building behaves and performs, if you then layer in actually how it's used by its occupants, that can presumably make a significant difference to the data, or at least how you can impact well-being.
Absolutely. And we've seen within existing research that you can have an A or a BREEAM Excellent or whatever it may be, but if your occupants don't actually do or utilize the building the way they should be, that can fall to kind of equivalent of EPC F, for example. So essentially you're making all that renovation work redundant. So that's only part of the battle, is obviously making sure the building is equipped. Then we're looking at, well, how do we make sure that the occupants are educated and are able to use that building properly? And again, it falls back to accountability and support. So it's ongoing support. So once you do this testing, it should then allow that client or the homeowner to come back to you, because no one's perfect. Even if you know all the answers, you can, open a window while having a shower by mistake, and then it ends up with black spot mold in the house, or you forget to do a gutter and it comes blocked and water ingress into your house, for example. No one's perfect. Everyone's got day-to-day busy lives. So it's having that support system there to actually go, well, hold on a minute, that's not right. How can I address that? So education and ongoing support is a must, even if the building's optimized. Absolutely.
It sounds like we're heading down the road of having a user manual with every new build and then being licensed to live in it.
Yeah. I mean, maybe not to that extent, but I think, again, it's about knowledge that suits you. So I think, we've got the smart tech there. Built environment just needs to catch up universally to actually then kind of use it almost as the brain of the building. So, you've got an Amazon or a Google Dot or whatever you may have in your home. Essentially you've got a home hub, and then each room is then assigned a smaller unit, which then essentially you can connect your whole house. And we've got smart tech and things available now, but what is still lacking to a degree of kind of being almost mandatory is this, well, we can actually use that as a way of enhancing and monitoring well-being and the behaviour of the occupants, and also potentially having small enhancements the building can make themselves. So, for example, you open a window, it will recognise that and it will turn the heating down slightly, or it will then you have a shower, for example, and you forget to put the extractor fan on because the isolation switch turned off, it'll turn it on for you. And as well, putting savings rather than just this white noise of going, you could save £200 if you turn your lights off. Everyone's talking like that. And yes, it's relevant, but it becomes white noise. If you then had it, which was mapped, for example, to your avatar, your spending trends online, and it was associated to you. So I don't know, you were into golfing, for example, it would relate it and go, well, if you turned down your heating by 2 degrees, you'd save enough money to go on a new golf trip at that place you really like. It turns it into something worthwhile for the occupant rather than just white noise everyone's talking about.
I suppose one of the things that we should think about here is in terms of quantifying all of this data about a property and all the rest of it, is it possible to measure wellness against that, to know what the optimum a family could achieve by living in a house? Or is that a step too far?
No, I think it would definitely need a collaboration between obviously the medical industry and professionals and the built environment. I'm certainly not able to do that by myself, and no one, unless you've got a medical profession behind you, is able to in the built industry. So it's very careful that synergy between, or the collaboration between the two industries, because yes, what we can do is enhance a building, and we know based on symptoms and medical history that it does have an effect. But what we can't do is say, well, how much, or is that the cause of it? Because we're not, within the medical industry. However, I think if there was some kind of quantifiable way of saying, right, well, this family, based on various traits and health issues and reports, etc., here's your state as a person, as a family, put you in that environment and monitor and see what that optimization is. So I think with the collaboration between the two, absolutely, I think that's possible.
It feels like a worthwhile future endeavour to try and link the two together.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's not just about the wellness in the sense of physical, it's mental as well. It's regarding depression, stress, anxiety, as well as there is research now that is saying neurodivergence can actually, the symptoms of such can be made a lot worse, to the point where people can become almost unfunctional because of the environment that they're placed in. So it's a huge deal.
What sort of factors are driving that? I mean, I can imagine certain physical health conditions being affected by air quality. I can see that. I can understand that. But what are the factors of a building that could be influencing neurodiversity then, for example?
Yeah, so I mean, anything from noise pollution, which can cause constant disturbance in patterns and routine, things like that. If you've got poor lighting or inadequate lighting in your home, that again can cause the stress of not being able to do what you're wanting to do, or have safe, calm spaces. Electrical appliances is a big one as well. So the selection of where your Wi-Fi is, where, if you've got electrical components in your bedroom, stuff like that, that can have a massive interference. Black spot mold, where the spores are released, and it can heighten certain symptoms as well, and fatigue and stress and anxiety, which can then obviously lead to heightening symptoms. So there's a whole array of things, even down to the stuff of just clutter. Even if you're just not talking about the building occupant, if you've got clutter in your house, obviously it's a physical issue, but as well, it's that kind of that loss of control. And it's all of these things by themselves. You may not even notice, it may be a slight inconvenience, but when you cluster it all together, that's when the big impacts start to come through.
Yeah. I that one I can particularly recognise. I live in a household of 4 people, 3 of whom do nothing but accumulate clutter, and 1 of whom would benefit enormously from there being less clutter. I recognise that one very well. So, Jason, it feels like the desired outcome here is domestic harmony, which is a balance between good design and construction and good behaviours from the residents. Is that a fair summary of what we're trying to do?
That's exactly it. Yeah. So from anywhere from tenanted properties, where obviously a landlord has an obligation, both moral and legal, to make sure the home is safe, but also, to make sure that there's no well-being impacts negatively. But again, tenants then need to understand their role and what their responsibilities are, because it's not just a one-sided kind of dance, as it were. But that goes across the whole industry. Everybody who, whether they live in a flat, a condo, a chalet, a bungalow, whatever it may be, you cannot live in a building just without any kind of thought about what you're doing. You have to be able to work with the building and know why you're working with it, to make sure that it is, like you say, the synergy in your home.
Yeah. And it feels like the opportunity is there to sort of have a well-being rating on any new build. I suppose it's harder on any
Yeah,
legacy
absolutely. Yeah.
stock.
Well, I think, to be honest, you can have it on both, because I think you can have it on new builds in the sense, here is a statement, here is your well-being certification, and we've done this audit, it passes. However, on older stock, I think it's great, because what it can do is create a community. It can create almost a support network, because again, it's not just about penalizing or shaming people that, provide or live in poor quality and things like that. It's about saying, this is the issue, and this is how you can address it, and this is the community we can introduce you to. It's not just us saying from a theoretical perspective, but you can then look at this community and say, well, we've done it before, we've learned X, Y, and Z from this, and they can kind of learn from each other. So as part of that, funny enough, that's where the elemental cube comes in. And also, as the wellbeing surveyor, I'm introducing this wellbeing warranty and certification. So that's in the background. That is going to be launched early next year.
Yeah. So as somebody interested in buying a property, I could commission a survey which is not only about the structural integrity of the building. Actually, it could advise me on wellbeing, and potentially in the same way as a structural survey might say, you're going to need a new roof soon. It might say, these are the things that you could do to make it a more livable place.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's essentially, it's a wellbeing performance certification that's coming into place, which is essentially like an EPC, so energy performance certificate, but from a wellbeing perspective. So it'll be on the same kind of framework, so it's easy to understand. And then there'll be the recommendations that come with it. So then that can then be, although obviously not sort of regulatory or required in any way, it is something that can be used as an additional support tool, so that you know what you're getting yourself into. But digging deeper into that, into holidays, for example, if you're disabled in any way, or if you suffer from any kind of ailment, or you're neurodivergent or anything else, and for example, for any reason you need to go into central London, it can cause quite a stress. And so having something that can, from a well-being perspective, go, look, this would be appropriate for you, this wouldn't be appropriate for you. It can give you that sense of security before committing to anywhere that you're going. So it kind of goes above and beyond the obvious of buying or selling or renting a property. It really affects the entertainment industry, the holiday industry, everything like that.
So it's fascinating stuff, and it sounds like by taking this approach, you can do some of what we were talking about earlier on, as of addressing the gap in expectation from end users, from clients and so on, by actually sort of sharing more information around this. Let me ask you one final question on this topic, if I can. And the answer to this is not allowed to be people to buy more of your services around this. But if you had one wish around sort of embedding this kind of thing in the industry, what would that be? How would you go about it?
I would like people across the board, from the public all the way through to government, to take it more seriously, to actually see the connection between your health and your genuine well-being, because you only get one. And if that starts going downhill, it's very hard to come back from. And the environments we place ourselves in, whether that's just thinking day to day about what environment you put yourself in, all the way through to, well, how can we make the built environment as efficient and as safe as possible, because obviously it affects everything else. And if we can do that, even things like the NHS and, all of our medical support staff, etc., that will greatly be kind of the demand for such will be reduced significantly if that was achieved. So yeah, I think that would be my wish.
That feels like a call for a cross-government initiative as well, thinking less in terms of ministries and departments and more in terms of well-being.
Yeah, again, it's all about holistic approaches. You can't then, everyone's got their job, everyone's got their own kind of specific, I suppose, tunnel vision because they need to, but at the same time, it's about interconnecting those. We can't then complain as a country that we have an issue, say, with the NHS, but then not look at how we can do that if we've got experts saying, we're shouting about it. This is a way. This is not the only way, but this is a way that we're going to help. And then you do nothing about it. It's just counterproductive.
Yeah, it has to be a thread
that
runs all the way through. Okay, great. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.